So with that, I would like to gavel back in our subcommittees, and with that, recognize Mr. Carter of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hoggworth, thank you for being here again. I believe we saw you not too long ago. And as a follow-up of the question that I'd asked you earlier that I just didn't get the answer I was looking for, and I want to make sure I understand. And I'm going to try to be as succinct as I can and ask you to do the same. It's pretty simple yes or no question. And the question is, does the Ex-Im Bank, in any instance, whether you are lending money or whether you are guaranteeing a loan or whatever, do you ever participate in a loan that results in a lower interest rate than would be available on the open market?
Well, Congressman, what we do is we provide a guarantee, so the banks will determine what the interest rate is. We don't determine. So if we make a guarantee, bank pays essentially an insurance premium to us for a guarantee, and then they set the interest rate. We
Okay,
don't
wait,
set those rates.
yes or no? Do you ever participate in a loan that results in a lower interest rate than would be available on the open market?
Probably in the few cases we do a direct loan, they might be. They're intended to replicate the market, but could be above, could be below. That's an imprecise measurement.
So I'm going to take that as a yes.
I would say sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Well, and if it's any time yes, that's where I have a big problem. Let me tell you, because in my mind, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but in my mind, the Ex-Im Bank should be a source of a last resort. Is that correct? Is that the way you understand it?
That's exactly the way we run the bank, sir.
Okay, so whenever someone applies for a loan, is that part of the process when you approve a loan? We've been to 3 banks before, and they wouldn't approve it, and you are our last resort.
That's correct.
That's correct, because you are using the full backing of the United States government to guarantee a loan or to lend money. And that, in my mind, has a price that goes along with it. I'm a small businessman. I own 3 independent retail pharmacies. When I go to the bank, I do not get the same interest rate that a big company gets. And I understand that. I recognize the reason for that. But this is what's bothering so many people in my mind, is that we hear stories about companies that are utilizing the Ex-Im Bank, and it's resulting in a lower interest rate than what they could get on the open market. And as a source of last resort, that's not the way it is supposed to work.
Well, I think what we're referring to is loans that are made to buyers of U.S. goods. So when a buyer has a choice between goods from the United States or Japan, China, Germany, you name it, all those export credit agencies charge the same rate. We all charge the same rate because we want to have a level playing field that people choose the best product.
But again, the point that I'm trying to make, and I think you understand it, is that as a lender of last resort, that means that the price is higher. Now, if I could, and you and I have spoken before, and you know where I'm coming, because you know that I'm interested in the fact that you continue to say that you're returning $1 billion to the U.S. Treasury. And I like that, because to me, again, as I've said before, the national debt of $18 trillion, even more than that right now, is the greatest threat to our national security that I know of. And that concerns me. And I want to do something to try to get that down. I hate to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I don't want to do that. If you're generating $1 billion, and I understand what the critics have said, they've said, well, if you had to use the same accounting principles as being used by the other banks, it wouldn't be that way. Well, you're not having to use the same accounting principles. So if you are truly returning $1 billion, I want to know. I don't want that to go away. I want it, and truthfully, I think you can do better. I'm here to tell you I don't think you're doing your job well enough. If you were to charge the interest rate that is due for someone who is giving a loan as a result of being the last resort, then it ought to be more.
Well, sir, our job is to support U.S. jobs. That's first and foremost. And when we're providing a loan guarantee or a direct loan for a foreign buyer to buy U.S. goods, we are charging the same interest rates that, say, the French ECA, the German, and others. Chinese may charge even lower, but we're trying to keep competitive so we support the jobs here. That's our mandate. Our mandate is about jobs.
I
not
understand
about
you're trying to
revenue.
be competitive, but my point again, as I've said before, is that as a lender of last resort, that comes with a price. And I don't care what China is charging. If you have a company that comes to you and they have to, and you're their last resort, it ought to be more.
Well, and frequently the extra cost comes into the fees that are required, like points on a mortgage. On some of these projects, we may charge 12 cents on the dollar in terms of fees. So the interest may be low, but the fees are very high in order to.
I understand that, but you can go up on the fees so that the interest rate comes out to be
Gentleman's
the same.
time
Thank you,
has
Mr. Chairman. I
expired.
yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, the chair recognizes Mr. Heck of Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, very much. Chairman Hochberg, thank you so very much for being here. Indeed, thank you for your public service, sir. I think most of us have a fairly firm grasp, or at least an intuitive grasp, about how it is the XM interacts with larger businesses. But I think it would be instructive for this conversation for you to elaborate a little bit on how they interact with smaller businesses, be that traffic cones or mint extract or pickles, and the products. And the reason I'm asking this question is I've been involved in a lot of these conversations, and it always seems like an aha moment when they realize it's not always just a direct loan that fuels sales and growth. So maybe you could talk briefly about those products, sir.
Certainly. For our small business clients, the two products they primarily use, though not exclusively, is credit insurance, which is similar to fire and theft insurance, where they get insurance to cover their overseas receivables so they can ship goods. And like Jenny's Pickles, as an example, they will make the shipment and on open account and get paid, say, 60 days later. So that's one product we provide. And many insurance companies have very high minimums that they won't take some of these small clients. The other one is working capital loans. We provide a working capital loan for a number of companies whereby they get the cash. We guarantee a bank up to 90% to induce the bank to make that working capital loan so that they can buy the raw materials so that they can essentially assemble the goods, extend the credit to their customer. Those are the two primary products we provide to small businesses.
So do you apply the same standard of that those products must be, you must be the last resort for those products as well?
Well, in both cases, both at the insurance, usually an insurance broker is bringing us in and saying, okay, can I use the private sector or XM? So they're working with their broker to do so. In the same way the bank, if they could make the loan on their own, they would. They only call us in. Frankly, there's additional paperwork, additional transparency, additional scrutiny when you work with government agencies. So if the bank can do it on their own, they prefer to do it on their own. They come to us when the risk level is just be outside of their normal risk parameters.
So, Mr. Hochberg, that begs the obvious question about some of these working capital loans. It's my understanding that these are generally for 1 year.
Generally speaking, they're for 1 year.
And if the bank expires on June 30, and if these working capital loans are of the last resort and therefore been made available only through you, what is going to happen to those small businesses when they hit the 365th day? And do you have any sense about the number who currently have working capital loans?
The working capital loan, well, I'll give you one example, actually, in Ranking Member Waters District, a company called Ceilings Plus, owned by a woman named Nancy Mercolino. She provides the ceiling to the Doha airport. She used our working capital loan to support that export because she had to assemble all that material, ship it over to the airport, get it installed, and then get paid. She needed the working capital to keep that company going, and she's been a very extensive user of our working capital loan. On the 365th day, the problem is we would not be there to guarantee that loan, and it's made a number of banks very anxious about extending working capital loans while this bill is being debated because they don't want to be in a position when they don't want to have they're concerned, how will that company pay back that working capital loan when we're not there to guarantee it?
Do you think there would be a consequence to employment levels for those companies?
I do, and I'll read you a quote from a customer, Don Nelson, who was on the letter from the Chamber of Commerce sent, and he said, quote, this is Don Nelson, ProGauge Technologies in Bakersfield, California. He said, quote, nobody's going to take the place of XM. We're already working with a private bank. Without Ex-Im, we wouldn't have the collateral required for our project, and revenues would go down by about 75%. I'd have to lay off between 50 and 60 people. Ex-Im is critical to our business.
I'm glad you referred to some of those addendum quotes to the letter from the Chamber, because it's not clear to me that those were necessarily entered into the record with the broader letter, but some of them are very instructive. They're all basically small businesses. And I just might point out that we are virtually on the eve of National Small Business Week next week. A couple I found particularly instructive. A.J. Rose Manufacturing in Ohio. We have used Ex-Im loan guarantees to build our business for engine parts. Normally, banks will not extend loans to cover a small company's overseas orders, but Ex-Im's guarantees allow us to do that. With those guarantees, we exported an additional $2.7 million in engine parts and hired 19 people. Davenport Aviation, lo and behold, also in Ohio. We're in turbo growth mode right now, and we need cash. Cash life cycles can be long when dealing with markets in developing countries. It was Ex-Im that he points to as the reason for the success and the growth. Noshoke Inc., I'm pretty sure I butchered that, but also from Ohio. Ex-Im provides loans, loan guarantees, et cetera. It helps level the playing field for U.S. companies seeking new sales in fiercely competitive global markets. I urge Congress to support Ex-Im's swift reauthorization. Nearly 90% of your activity and transactions are for small businesses on the eve of National Small Business Week. I literally pray that we reauthorize the bank. Thank you. I have you back.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Pittenger, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to Chairman Henschling.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. So, Chairman Hochberg, we, among other questions, have been speaking about Ex-Im's mandates. So we have mentioned the green energy mandate, the renewable mandate, Sub-Sahara small business. But you also have guidelines on high carbon intensity that many have dubbed the no coal rule. In the bank's press release dated December 12, 2013, you said, quote, "I strongly support the administration's efforts to build an international consensus such that other nations follow our lead in restricting financing of new coal-fired power plants." Now, as opposed to your other mandates, the no coal mandate, Congress did not vote on that, correct?
Congress voted an environmental standard that was put in 23 years ago into our charter, sir.
Okay, well, where did the no coal policy come from?
We,
Because you were the one who announced that on December 12, 2013. It had not previously been imposed, correct?
we actually support coal mining equipment, we support coal exports, and we support coal-fired power plants in poor countries.
Well, in poor countries, but in other countries you do not. So I understand the asterisk, but the bottom line is you and I assume your board unilaterally made the decision not to support the other coal-financed projects, correct?
The board reviewed it, and over time...
Did Congress vote on it?
Congress voted an environmental standard. The bank...
So that's where you draw your authority from.
The bank was sued under the Bush administration for not applying the environmental standard sufficiently, and in a consent
Oh,
decree...
I know there's lots of groups that sue frequently, so I understand that, but the bottom line is Congress did not pass a standard to prohibit you from financing coal-fired projects.
Congress passed a statute that we had to take the environment into account, and we were sued because
Okay,
we
so
were
you
not doing
also
that
talked
sufficiently.
about this leads to a question of balance, I think is the word, yes. You said, quote, "The bank engages in an important balancing act in supporting our exports, weigh potential impacts of the environment associated with our financing." So if you and the other board members decide to do another important balancing act, you can make other decisions, for example, to have a no petroleum policy, I assume. I understand what Congress passed with their renewable mandate, but that's not the mandate we're talking about, is it?
Well, we actually support the oil and gas industry. It's one of our largest.
No, but you could make the decision based upon the earlier authorization, and as you've decided to essentially do a no-coal policy, you could make the decision to do a no-petroleum policy.
We don't have a no-coal policy, sir.
Okay, with the exception of poor countries. How about a mostly no-coal policy?
and-
Bottom line is, Congress didn't authorize it, Mr. Hochberg. You decided to do it.
Well, Congress put it in our charter 23 years ago. The bank was sued before I got there, and part of the consent decree before I got there was,
Okay, well, again,
was
you were the
the
one
court
who came
review.
out with the statement, so I'm just asking you to think about this particular hypothetical. Coming from Texas, it could be that November after next, maybe that we are, at least in my state, celebrating the election of either President Perry or President Cruz. And say we appoint a new head of the EXIM Bank and new board members. At that point, I assume nothing would prevent that head of the EXIM Bank, given the authority you have assumed, to say that EXIM Bank can no longer offer assistance to build any clinic that intends to provide abortions. Under the same authority, I assume then the bank could decide it will no longer provide assistance to countries that limit Second Amendment rights because maybe somebody sued the EXIM Bank. Maybe they decide that they will no longer extend credit to countries that have debt to GDP ratios worse than ours, although I don't think there's many on the list at the moment. So again, this is not a congressional mandate. This is one that you and the board decided to do, and I just wanted to point out to all members that once EXIM assumes this authority, it's Katie bar the door on self-imposed mandates of political lending, ideological-based lending, and that can cut both ways, and that's the main point I needed to make. And Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman from North Carolina, and I yield him back his 1 second.
And I yield back.
And your gentleman's time has expired. Excuse me. Seeing no Democrats at this time who have not been recognized for the first round, we will go to Chairman Gowdy from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hochberg, I was a very mediocre lawyer in a previous life, but I was mediocre for a long time, which means I got to watch lots and lots of juries. And I look in 2012 and I see that 330 members of Congress voted to reauthorize the bank. And now I'll talk to my colleagues, and trust me when I tell you this, it's on life support. So how in the course of 3 years could you go from a 3-to-1 majority in the People's House and it be on life support? What happened?
sir, I'm not sure I'm in the position to answer that question. You need to
If
talk to your
you
colleagues.
can't answer that question, then you might as well call the coroner. But you're the one that people are going to be looking to. So let's start with this. 2012, but you will agree with me, there are three categories of folks generally. There are folks who are going to be opposed to the reauthorization for very principled reasons, many of whom are my friends. They've made up their minds. And they're going to be folks who are going to vote for reauthorization no matter what, no matter how many indictments, no matter how many anything. And then there's a big group in the middle that would like to vote for reauthorization, provided there was some reforms. And that's the group in 2012 that gave you a 330-person vote. So I think what they're looking for is, how are you doing on the reforms? How'd you do for the last 3 years on the legally mandated reforms? Do you agree that Chairman Hensarling is a reasonable person who would be open to factual persuasion?
He's smiling. I'll let the chairman decide that question.
No, well, I mean, I'm asking you, because you got Chairman Hensarling, you got Chairman Ryan, you got Kevin McCarthy, all of whom, even though I'm on the opposite side of the issue from them, I find them to be open to factual persuasion, or at least give me an audience, at least let me make the case. So what is the case that you did what Congress asked you to do in 2012?
Well, when I was here just 2 weeks ago, I enumerated every reform that was put in the 2012, and I enumerated, I'm happy to do again, each report and each change that was asked for and the date we did that. So we have complied with each and every reform of the 2012 Reauthorization Act.
All right, I want to just start with one reform that I remember a lot of my colleagues discuss, which is the eventual goal of winding down the Ex-Im Bank.
That responsibility was given to the Secretary of the Treasury.
Who, by the way, was among the most dreadful witnesses I have ever had the displeasure of hearing testimony. And he honestly, right now, is the best argument against reauthorization. So I'm glad that he's not with you. Can you make the case that Treasury has done what we've asked, that it's a high priority that all the banks be wound down?
Well, I can say the following, sir. I'm actually I've met with my colleagues just about a month ago, meeting with some more colleagues in the next 10 days to talk about exactly that subject, because I've decided I take the will of Congress seriously. I am talking to my colleagues about what do we do about winding this down?
Well, you can count as well as I can count. And 330 was a good, strong vote. And now we're struggling to get to 218. And if you do get to 218 this time, and the reforms are not implemented that lots of my colleagues want to see implemented, then it won't even be close in a couple of years. So I don't mean to put undue pressure on you, but the fellow from the Treasury is not going to help unless they send somebody else from the Treasury. That one is not going to help. You're going to have to make the case sometime between now and the expiration date of how you are doing what Congress asked you to do in 2012.
Well, all the reforms that this committee has asked us to do at Ex-Im Bank, and there were more than a dozen, we have complied with, whether it's the Federal Register, whether it's the default report to Congress, whether it's an expansion in textiles. Each one of those reforms I enumerated at this committee hearing 15 days ago.
All right, Mr. Chairman,
One in the Treasury Department is outside of my authority.
I'm with you, but you and I are watching the jury together, and we've gone from 330 to life support. So we can quarrel and quibble over whose responsibility that is. Maybe the Treasury, may not be the Treasury, but you got to make a really compelling case between now and the expiration date, or we may not get to 218.
Well, we do have Congressman Fincher has a bill with close to 60 co-sponsors. Ranking Member Waters has a bill with 190 co-sponsors. There's 250 on those two different bills. They're not identical, but 250 co-sponsors between those two bills, just to start with.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yes, sir.
Again, seeing no colleagues on the Democrat side who have not had their opportunity to ask a question in the first round, we will go to Mr. Schweikert of Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In some of the mechanical questions, let's do something we would find interesting, or some of us would. Discuss with me the definition you use for impairment of both guaranteed debt and actual debt you have extended. Because you keep using default, and I'm not after default, I'm after what's impairment. Is it when there's a violation of rep and warrants? When a payment is delayed? Give me a definition of what you use as impairment.
We report our defaults to Congress.
Now, I'm not asking defaults. One more time. Impairment, just like every other institution, has to deal with when there's a violation of rep and warrants, and I've already looked through the statements, and you use you use some very interesting definitions. So walk me through why your definitions are so different than the rest of the world.
We issue a default report to Congress.
Not default. One more time. Impairment.
In that report, we have an aging report. When we have amounts that are overdue, that are not in default, they may be in a technical default.
Okay, so when I looked at your report and I started saying, here's my violation of rep and warrants, where do I find that line on there?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
When I go through your reports and I look for where I find the number of folks who, or excuse me, the number of debt you have outstanding that have missed a payment, are delayed in the payment, or have not fully paid the payment, where do I find it?
We have an aging report that's
Not aging. What,
Well, this indicates when someone is in arrears, less than 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or 150 days.
And within there, I can see where it's saying this was part of a scheduled agreement within the rep and warrants.
No, then
agreement.
they're overdue.
Okay, so when you're marking it as a 30-day delay, That's absolute impairment on there.
That's an impairment, but then we're working.
So if I were to look at your complete loan book right now of everything, what's your actual percentage of all impairments and all rep and warrants violations?
I will get back to, I'm not going to, I don't want to
Because
speculate.
it's borders on almost sort of a fraudulent discussion around here when we say, well, we only have this percentage of default, but if I had a money center bank here, you all know, all of you from the banking business, we would not be talking about default. We talk about impairment on the book.
Well, the report we send to you, sir, GAO has approved that it's consistent with congressional intent, and we're following the law. So we are
Okay,
reporting.
so, all right,
If
I look,
Congress
no,
changes the law,
no.
we'll-
I look forward to you going through it and walking me through the numbers, because I've dug, I have a 5-hour flight home. I've taken your stuff and dug and tried to understand where, because it doesn't look the same as every other money center institution. I would look at how they would provide me that data. Can you walk me through just a couple other mechanics, just so I understand? How much of your book right now is direct loans, and how much of it is actually enhancements, guarantees?
I will give you a number off the top of my head. I don't have that number memorized.
Okay, just give me your best guess.
Roughly speaking.
And I won't hold you to it.
Roughly speaking, and I will confirm this in writing, it's about 10% of our loans are direct, and the rest are guarantees.
Okay, so I'm holding 90% over here are enhancements. Now, on much of the enhancements you're doing actually 90% of the liability ladder?
No, well, banks pay us a fee. They pay essentially an insurance premium.
Look, everyone in this room understands mortgage insurance and those things, so we're all familiar. So you're covering the top 90% of the liability?
No. We provide 100% guarantee,
So you do 100% guarantee.
and they pay a fee for that.
Okay, so so unlike any other loan enhancement I've ever heard of, you're guaranteeing 100%, well, actually, the American taxpayers are ultimately guaranteeing 100%
Well-
of that. Now, on your syndication, do you do any syndication of that risk?
Currently, well, we're part of larger syndications,
Okay, no,
but in
what-
our loan book, we do not
no,
syndicate our
I
loans.
only have like 40 seconds.
We
I'm
do not
sorry, I wish we
syndicate.
had more time, because this I find interesting.
I'd be happy to come to your office and
But the
review.
syndication of your risk to private entities is how much of that 90% of your book?
Well, the loans that we guarantee 100% of those loans to
That
foreign
wasn't,
buyers.
how much of then that 90% on the 90% are you syndicating the risk to outside entities?
We do not syndicate to outside.
Why?
entities. We have,
There's a vibrant syndication market out there of doing enhancements. So remember, there's another 99% of our nation's exports that go out with surety bonds, other types of exports credit. So there's this robust world out there happening. Why aren't you
Because
reaching out
generally
and
speaking-
participating in some of that?
we are in the deal because the private sector cannot do
Even if
anymore.
you were taking
gentleman's
part of the
time has
ladder of
expired.
risk, they wouldn't participate? And sorry, I know I'm over, Mr. Chairman, but it's an interesting question of why they don't participate. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And we're hoping to do a second round, so if you want to stick close, you might be up soon. So with that, we will go to Mr. DeSantis of Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Hochberg. I noticed that XM beneficiaries have donated to the Clinton Foundation. Was there any communication between Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State and you or your staff about any authorizations?
Not that I recall.
Would you be able to check and get back with us about on the staff level?
Be happy to.
Okay, thank you. When the survey in 2013, I think you've been asked about this at previous hearings, but 50% of the employees at the bank said that only 50% said they were free to disclose a suspected violation of any law, rule, or regulation without fear of reprisal. Do you think that culture is problematic and is linked to some of the instances that have been discussed where there may be impropriety?
In each case where there has been some impropriety, and it lets me remind everybody that in all but 4 cases, they are outside of the bank. They are customers and companies trying to defraud the U.S. government. They were identified, by and large, by employees who saw something that was suspicious and brought it to someone's attention.
Very well understood. There was, people were going to try to look at different data about the bank earlier in this year, and there were, because I guess you had listed the bank with the funds, but then the data was removed without warning. So what was the reason for that? And two, has the data been put back up?
All the data's been put back up. It was down for about 2.5 weeks. We had, this is a government regulation going back to 2007 or 8, where we posted data. It came to our attention that a customer, an exporter, felt that there was too much business confidential information on the web. We took the data down, reviewed it, and we made adjustments so we would not hurt any U.S. exporter, at the same time trying to be transparent. And so we're trying to balance those two.
Understood. The XM authorized more than $450 million in loan guarantees for First Solar, which I guess was selling, as I understand it, solar panels to itself. So how does those transactions and that setup benefit U.S. exports?
Well, every transaction, if it's a related party, they're all done on an arm's length transaction. This was a company set up in Canada. It was a SPV, a special purpose vehicle, that was then going to sell power to the Canadian grid. That was approved by the bank. In fact, at the end, we did not disperse that loan. That loan, the project was able to secure private sector financing, which we're happy to do, and so we never implemented that loan.
There's been talk about, with the impending reauthorization, that if the bank is not reauthorized, you have a lot of transactions that have been done, that somehow the jobs linked to XM financing are, quote, at risk. But as I understand it, if the bank is not reauthorized, that does not shut down any of the current streams of financing that have already been authorized, correct?
Well, yes. If we've authorized a loan, we've made a firm commitment, and we will execute that. We cannot do any new loans.
Exactly. So any of the jobs that are specifically linked to the financing that's already been done, if people are saying it's going to cost jobs, they got to put that aside and show how, without having the bank originating new loans, how that would cost jobs. But you can't say that the jobs that are linked to the current financing are going to be in jeopardy.
Right.
Is that correct?
The quote I read about Don Nelson in California said, I would have to lay off between 50 and 60 people if Exim Bank is not there. That's just his quote.
But what he's saying is that he wants to have the financing for future deals.
For future transactions.
Okay. And he is, I guess, implying that there will not be financing on the private market for those transactions. And I think that's a matter that's subject to dispute. I know you would probably agree with him. I know many members of the panel would think that that you may see that. But I appreciate your testimony. I have a little bit of time left, but I will go ahead and yield back because I know some people want to get in round two.
That gentleman yields back. And again, seeing no new members of the Democrat side of the aisle, we will continue on the Republican side with Mrs. Love of Utah for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. I'm new here, so you're going to have to help educate me on some of these things. Is it your goal to wind down the bank so that the private sector can participate in some of the export finance?
Our goal is to fill in gaps in the private sector. During the financial crisis, we were called to do more of that.
Did you ever talk about winding down the XM Bank?
No, I didn't talk about
Never in 2012, you never talked about getting to a point where you can wind down so that the private sector can take up more of the export financing?
Well, we step back when the private sector steps forward. That's why
Okay.
our loans are off by almost 50% from 2 years
So you never
ago.
talked about winding down the bank at all?
I guess maybe I don't fully understand the question then.
Oh, okay, well, that's interesting, because I have all sorts of memos here that talks about what you're required to do, what the reauthorization in 2012, how you got a broad support, and the things that you had promised that you were going to do. And one of the things that you talked about was, one of the things that was discussed was winding down.
Well, the
So-
Treasury Department was called to do that if the bank is not reauthorized.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what the goals. How do you reach that goal so you're not in direct competition with our private sector here?
Exactly. We are brought in in almost every single case by the private sector. A bank says to their customer, we cannot make this loan unless we get a guarantee. An insurance broker says, I can't find you private sector insurance. Let's go to the Export-Import Bank. So it is private sector insurance brokers, private sector banks that say, we need to guarantee a loan because we cannot make the loan on our books without a
Okay, so do you have a set of steps, a set of stages, different things that you can actually give to this body for perusal on how you're going to get to the goal, get to that goal to allow some of the private sector to get into this?
Well, the private sector's in every one of those deals. So they bring us in. The private sector says, we need a
Do
guarantee
you
in order to make
do
the
you
loan.
have any goal at all to limit your footprint in this market?
Well, yes,
Or do you have a goal to expand it?
no, I tried to say, our loan volume is running almost half what it was 2 years ago because there's less need for us today.
Okay, so over a 6-year period from 2008 to 2014, the bank's outstanding financial commitments nearly doubled, growing from $59 billion to $112 billion. This unprecedented growth has been attributed largely to financial crisis and resulting as a retreat of the private sector lending from that market. I have a problem. I have a problem with that. I think the biggest problem that we have with Ex-Im Bank is not listening to Congress, not implementing the reforms that it has said that it would implement. And you know, I'd like to talk about something else before we move on, before I lose my time. But advocates for the bank like to point out that the bank is needed to counter foreign competition. That is to say that counter foreign ECAs, thereby leveling the playing field for U.S. companies. Yet, according to the bank's own data, only about 1/3 of the bank's activity is characterized as countering foreign competition. So does that mean that 2/3 aren't to counter foreign competition?
No, the other 2/3 are filling in the gap when the private sector won't make the loan.
Okay.
For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are very few private banks that will do it without a loan. That's why we have such a large portfolio in sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, so again, I'm having a really hard time here. The biggest problem, when everybody asks me what is the biggest surprise are these pretty much entities like this that aren't accountable to Congress. They don't keep promises that they make, and then they come back and they say, yes, we need your reauthorization. We understand that we're in trouble. We understand that there's, you know, all sorts of fraud going on, but, you know, we need you to trust us. When do we get to the point where we trust the American people again?
We have complied with every
fill in the gaps.
every single requirement that this committee has asked us to do, and I enumerated that on the
Okay.
committee hearing 2 weeks
All right, so here's what I'm saying. I just got a text from my 15-year-old. She's got 8 classes that she's taking right now, 7 A's and 1 C. And right after that text that she sent me, she said, Mom, by the way, don't worry, I'm getting that C up. It'll be done by the end of the year. I'm making up this paper, I'm making up this paper, and this is the plan, and I'll have straight A's. Great. There's a plan from a 15-year-old. I think we can do a better job in making sure that we're showing a clear plan on how we're going to limit our footprint and allow the private sector to become more involved in what we're doing here. Thank you. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired, and we will then recognize Mr. Ellison from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the chairman and ranking member for the time. Sir, welcome to the committee, and we do appreciate your presence here, and do want to observe that it is the protocol to be respectful to all of the witnesses who appear before us. So I want to let you know that I personally make that commitment, and thank you for your presence, and thank you for your hard work on behalf of the American people.
Thank you.
If Congress didn't reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank, would there be a job impact? Now, I don't want to try to put you on the spot and say how many jobs, because of course, if you know, that's fine, but I wouldn't expect you to know. But would there be a job impact, and can you kind of describe what it might look like?
Well, it would be a large impact. Last year, as I mentioned, we've supported 164,000 jobs. I read a letter from Don Nelson that talked about laying off as many as 50 to 60 employees. I visited a company in the state of Illinois, the Matthews Company that makes grain silos. With our support, instead of laying people off in the winter months when there's not a demand in the United States, they do exporting. So sometimes I get questions about support. We support, that way he keeps his employees around a year-round on a 12-month basis versus having to lay them off for 4 or 5 months a year. So all those jobs would go out the window.
Now, do you think there'd be an impact in the manufacturing sector?
Well, this grain silo is a manufacturer. Don Nelson is a company that manufactures. I was talking to Congressman Ginta about a company in New Hampshire that's now 90% exports. We work with a company in the Congressman's left, Florida, sells medical supplies, medical technology. He's 90% exports at this point, and we help them finance their insurance to places like Egypt, Iraq, Sri Lanka, very difficult markets where he cannot get private sector insurance.
If you don't mind me interrupting for a moment, I have a business in my district that is an engineering company that does business in Senegal, employs a number of people, not just engineers, and they have nothing but good things to say about the help they've received from the Ex-Im Bank. So I can tell you from my own district, the work you do is well appreciated. Now, Mike, here I have a question for you. Now, there's been some questioning that is implied that this committee has asked the Export-Import Bank to do certain things, and there's some implication that you didn't do them. Are you aware of any outstanding demands that the Ex-Im Bank has yet to complete that they've been charged with?
Well, this hearing was originally on mandates. The last hearing was on the requirements of the 2012 reauthorization, and I brought with me that time a stack of every single report the committee asked for, a copy of the report, and the date we submitted it to the committee, whether it's on defaults, the Federal Register, the textile report, a small business report, every one of those that were enumerated, we have complied with and sent copies to this committee.
Yes, I'm looking at a document here that looks like
Yes, I
kind
have
of a list of all the things we've asked you to do.
precisely.
I see the word closed or responded after a lot of them. Fully implemented is commonly observed. And it looks like you've been doing what we asked you to do.
We got 16 recommendations from GAO, for example. We have complied with 15, and we're working on the 16th.
Yeah.
Some of
okay.
them were received more recently. They're not all received in 2012, obviously.
Yeah, I understand. So let me ask you this. So in 2002, Congress has directed the bank to promote export of goods and services relatable to renewable energy sources. And although it's not explicitly part of the bank's charter, since 2008, appropriators have included language directing the bank to make available not less than 10% of its aggregate authority to finance renewable energy exports. What type of financing does Export-Import Bank make available to exporters of renewable energy products?
Most of the work we do with the renewable energy sector has been on guaranteed loans to foreign buyers, wind turbines in Central America, South America, solar panels in India. There's a solar project in South Africa. So they're usually guaranteed loans, so the foreign buyer chooses an American product versus solar panels from Germany or China or Japan and so forth.
Does that help domestic makers?
Well, one, it puts the jobs here. Two, it provides them with sufficient volume that they also can provide those products here as well.
Yeah. And why are the loan terms generally longer for energy projects?
Well, by international agreement, the renewable energy can go as long as 18 years. That's the global standard. So to be consistent and a level playing field, we provide that as well.
I want to thank the gentleman and yield back the time that I think I don't have any more left of.
That is accurate, but we are being generous. So with that, we are going to go to a second round of questioning, and the chair will recognize Mr. Mulvaney from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hopberg, I probably won't take the whole 5 minutes. I want to clean up and follow up on some questions that some other folks have started with you. Mr. Jordan was asking you about the Exxon project in Papua New Guinea, and I think you said, and I couldn't get a transcript since you made the comments earlier this morning, that the IG's office asked you for invoices on the $500 million of local expenditures. Is that correct?
$500 million was certified by ExxonMobil.
Right.
That money was expended for the project.
Right, but what did the IG ask you? Again, I'm just asking what you said to Mr. Jordan.
The IG was asking to see the actual invoices that ExxonMobil had.
And you said?
We do not have those, nor did any other banks in the consortium. There were over it.
Why,
could have been
why not?
None of the banks in the consortium require that, so we were at odds with the rest of the banking.
But you've changed your policy on that sense, or
We're
no?
now asking for more in-depth, yes.
So you were able to do it before, and you just chose not to do it?
It was not part of our standard. Listen, one of the good things about the Inspector General, why I work with him closely, why I meet with him, is so we
Hopper,
get
I'm just
better
talk-
ideas to operate the bank.
Again, when I'm accusing you of doing something, you'll probably know. I'm just actually trying to figure out what the follow-up to Mr. Jordan's question was. Mr. Schweikert asked you a question about the aging report. And here I will be a little more tongue-in-cheek with you, because you and I have done this before. Where is Cuba on that aging report? Pre-Castro Cuba. How many days would that be?
That would be very long, sir.
What about the loans to Shanghai Shek's government before Mao took over mainland China that are still on your books? How long have those been there?
I'll have to get back to you on
Okay,
that, sir. I
but they're
don't-
still there, aren't they? Both of those are still there.
Some of
Those are
them.
still, by the way, Ranking Member, those are still deemed to be performing loans at the Export-Import Bank, the loans to pre-Castro Cuba and Shanghai
No,
Shek's
they're not
government.
performing, they're just not written off.
They're not default, they're not
No,
under
no,
default.
they're not performing loans, but we don't write them off because we're actually, in some cases, we can collect, believe it or not, 20 years later. So we don't write them off, but they're written down.
Speaking of which, by the way, you haven't asked the administration to talk about the loans Cuba owes us from before Castro as part of the current discussions about changing relationships with Cuba, have you?
We have not had any discussion
All
on
right,
that.
just checking. Ms. Love asked you a question about the 2012 reauthorization, and you said, I thought I heard you say that it was your interpretation that it was up to the Secretary of the Treasury to talk about winding down the bank, was the term you're using, but getting out of various segments of your business, if the bank was not reauthorized. That's not your testimony, is it?
There were two separate, I thought there were two separate questions, if I understood it, sir.
Yeah.
One was about if we're not reauthorized, the Treasury winds down the bank. A second requirement of the reauthorization was to negotiate an end of export credits in general globally.
Correct. And that second piece is a legal obligation of the Treasury Secretary right now under the current law, correct?
And they have sent 3 reports to Congress on their performance on that each
How
year.
often do you talk to Mr. Liu about that?
I've talked to Mr. Liu, I've talked to Undersecretary Sheets about it.
No, how often have you talked with Mr. Liu about that?
I talk with Mr. Liu perhaps twice a year on that, and to the Undersecretary far more frequently.
So your testimony is that several times a year you'll sit down with representatives of the Treasury to go over the implementation of Section 11 of the 2012 reauthorization.
Without question, several times.
And who is the Undersecretary that you're speaking of?
It is now Nate Sheets. Before that was Lael Brainerd.
Were you aware that the CEO of Delta was here and testified under oath that Lael Brainerd told him that she never intended to implement those reforms of the 2012 law? Are you aware of that testimony?
I heard about that. I'm not aware of the specifics of it, sir.
And I recognize the fact that she's no longer employed by you, but did you follow up on that? Did that surprise you? Is that consistent with the law in your mind?
Well, she was the Undersecretary of Treasury.
Right.
That's not, I chair the Export-Import Bank.
I recognize she doesn't work for you. I guess I said she doesn't work for you anymore. That's right. She's never worked for you. But was it unusual? Did you think it was unusual for the Undersecretary of the Treasury to say, or at least allegedly say, as we have it from sworn testimony, that she was not going to implement the law?
That has not been my experience with the Treasury Department. I think they've acted very aggressively and has submitted a report to this committee every year in November.
Lastly, and I know we made a big deal earlier this morning about the newspaper articles with Mr. Boehner's quotes in it about the importance of the bank. I was just wondering if you were aware of older newspaper articles regarding the bank where Boeing actually said that if the Export-Import Bank were to go away, it would not affect their deliveries, and that the company was, quote, confident they could find alternative funding sources for customers that would not require it to boost its support of aircraft sales. Are you aware of that position by Boeing?
Gentlemen, as time has expired, but I'll allow you to answer.
The position that, I'm not going to comment on that. I don't have the specifics in front of me, sir.
And
Okay.
the gentleman's time has expired. All right. With that, we will go to Ms. Moore of Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And you just have been a marvelous witness under fire here. You just have been pilloried here today about everything from, fair value accounting to, this being corporate welfare. Never heard of welfare where we return money to the Treasury. supported jobs, but you have been under particular attack with regard to the mandate of the bank to support environmentally sustainable projects. So I'll give you a chance to sip some water because I'm going to just sort of talk for a couple of my minutes here. We had once had a speaker here who was oft quoted by both Democrats and Republicans who said that all politics was local. So it really doesn't surprise me that between these two committees, my count, and it's a rough count, of no less than 7 members from Texas, and they are valiantly protecting the petroleum business. And Koch Industries, for example, is the second wealthiest, I guess, company in the nation, and they manufacture and refine fossil fuels, chemicals, and we've talked a whole lot about lawsuits. Just between 1999 and 2003, they've been fined like at least $400 million in fines, penalties, and judgments. People have died because of oil spills across 6 states. They've paid almost $300 million in wrongful death suits because of a ruptured pipeline. And of course, most of the people in the fossil fuel energy support stuff like the Keystone Pipeline, even though they're very dangerous. Koch has had the largest civil fine ever under federal environmental law. And so this is I just want you to understand that it's not personal, Mr. Hochberg. They are defending the oil business, as they say. In 2000, a federal grand jury returned 97-count indictment against Koch Industries for environmental crimes. So I just want you to know the environment that you're in, so that you can appreciate. So it's not personal. People are just simply decrying one of the mandates that you have. Just quickly, would Koch Industries qualify for support under the Ex-Im Bank? They say we pick winners and losers and so on. And if Koch Industries were to engage in any of the other activities that other smaller businesses, would they qualify for your financing?
Yes, they would. And they,
Okay.
in fact, have been a beneficiary of Ex-Im financing in the past.
Okay, very good. There was also discussion of your financing Solyndra. There was a lot of criticism around their solar modules. Did you finance Solyndra? I wasn't aware that you had done that.
I'm glad you asked that question. There's been a lot of rumors to that effect. No, we did not. We financed a company in Belgium that was looking to buy solar panels. They had a choice between German, Chinese, and American. And they chose panels from the United States, and they chose panels from actually manufactured by the Solyndra Corporation. We lent money to the Belgian company, and as a result, they bought American panels and supported jobs in our country versus China or Germany.
And so those rooftop solar panels are providing energy for a distribution center, an international supermarket chain.
Right. And the loan is performing and is being paid back.
Okay, very good. I wanted to know that. I would like to yield last minute to Mr. Heck. You're going to get your own time, too.
Didn't see that one coming, but I'm grateful for it. Thank you. Mr. Chair, there was a lot of talk in my earlier question about small business. And we have had previous talk about where our country would be rendered as the only developed country without an export credit authority, should we allow it to expire. Just briefly, however, to put it in another perspective, how big would our Export-Import Bank have to be in order to be comparable to the 4 that China has?
Oh, goodness. Well, China has one called Sinosure that does their credit insurance like we do, and they do in the range of $325, $350 billion a year. We did in total, not just insurance, but in total, $20 billion last year. I mean, thankfully, we have a better private sector. We have a better banking system so that we're a capitalist society. Companies can rely on the private sector and don't have to only look to us. They look to us when the private sector is not there.
Gentlelady's time has expired. With that, we will recognize Mr. Heiss of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said that you have complied with every request of this committee. I just find that to be absolutely false. We have not received, for example, a response to any of my requests from a couple of weeks ago regarding a full accounting of all the missing XM data on data.gov 2 weeks ago. Why have we not received that, sir?
Well, I thought the question, sir, was about the requirements of the 2012 Reauthorization Act. I was referring to we have fully complied with every requirement of the 2012 Act. In terms of, we have received over 24 letters from this committee and subcommittee since July, and we are been replying to every one of those as quickly as possible.
When can we expect to have it?
Actually, we have responded to your letter, sir. Sent your letter. We did respond.
Why have we not received it?
We sent it to the committee on Friday.
Okay, we'll check into that, and we will be getting back with you if that is not here. But as of a few moments ago, it had not been received. Let's go on. Also, at our last hearing, you also promised to provide this panel with information explaining how Boeing knew about Delta's FOIA request for communications between Boeing and XM. You said that Boeing had knowledge of the request because the bank notified Boeing that its information was being sought, yet this information was not included in your response to the panel. Again, why have you not provided that information?
What I tried to explain to her is that under FOIA rules, and I'm not a lawyer, but under FOIA rules, if a company is the subject of a FOIA request, we're obligated to inform the party that we are providing information subject to a FOIA request.
And that was not done.
No, we did provide that information.
Well, you
That's
didn't
why-
provide it to us, and you didn't provide it to Delta either. Again, as
Well,
of,
Delta was the one who asked for it, so we had to,
we asked for it as well in this committee, and we did not receive it, and I want to know why.
that letter was sent to the committee on Friday, April 24th.
All right, so you're saying again that that has been received.
We sent the letter to the committee on the 24th.
All right, why
of
was it
April.
not, why was Delta not notified?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Notified about,
According to your rules, your policies regarding FOIA requests and regulations, that the bank shall require the requester, in this case Delta, in writing, whenever a business, that would be you, the bank, is given a pre-disclosure notification, and that has never been received even from Delta, by Delta, even up to the last few minutes before I walked in here. Delta's never heard anything, and why is this?
well, we have, if I understand correctly, sir, and if I'm not, I will get back to you, but if a company requests a FOIA request or we inform the company that whose data we're therefore sharing with an outside party, Delta was the requester, not the subject of the FOIA.
On October, Delta submitted a FOIA request in October of 2012. February 2013, Boeing submits its FOIA request for Delta's FOIA. On April 2013, XM publishes a FOIA log showing Delta's request was not started. So he didn't even acknowledge that Delta had put forth a request. We're clearly missing some communication here from the bank to Boeing between October of 2012 and February of 2013, and we expect a response.
Well, in the letter I sent to the committee on April 24th fully outlined all of the answers to the questions you're asking today. I'm sorry that somehow from the committee to your office that letter didn't
This
get
has been going on for years.
Well, we just got the letter request from you at the hearing 2 weeks ago, and I submitted a response on April 24th.
Why has it taken so long to fill the request?
Well, sir, listen, we have gotten, from this committee and from Chairman Issa, we have submitted 100,000 pages of documents over the last several years, 50,000 of those in the last
All right,
7
let me go
months.
back to this one because I've got just barely over 30 seconds. November 19th, 2014, Delta submits FOIA request number 2. January 12th of this year, they paid over $90,000 invoice. As of April of this year, April 20th, the latest status update from XM, There's still been no response to Delta. Why is this taking so long?
Sir, we have gotten this year already as many FOIA requests as all of last year. We're running at double the level, and we've also, as I said, have to have we prioritize responses to Congress over FOIA requests. So we just submitted 50,000 pages to Congress in the last 6-7 months. That said, I would like to improve our FOIA response. I think we need to get better at it and move faster.
Well, I think you do as well.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, sir.
With that, we will recognize Ranking Member Cartwright for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Hochberg, I want to pick up on some questioning from Mr. Henseling, who unfortunately has stepped out, but he raised the possibility that I have misquoted the Speaker of the House on the question of support for the Ex-Im Bank and the jobs that it creates. And I can tell you that I've now looked at both Politico and Reuters, and they are quoting the same thing exactly, word for word, from Mr. Boehner, who said this: "There are thousands of jobs on the line that would disappear pretty quickly if the Ex-Im Bank were to disappear," unquote. And so both Politico and Reuters said that, and I take it you still agree with that statement, Mr. Hawk?
Yes, I do, sir.
All right. And I want to talk about the bipartisan support the Ex-Im Bank and its mandates have received over the past few decades. Congress has reauthorized the Ex-Im Bank 16 times. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
All right. And as Business Insider has noted, 14 of the 16 times the bank's reauthorization has come up for a vote, it has passed by either unanimous consent or voice vote, which is tantamount to unanimous vote, in at least one chamber of Congress. In addition, H.R. 597, and I think you talked about this a little bit, H.R. 597, the Reform Exports and Expand the American Economy Act, which would reauthorize the bank while instituting certain reforms, has 60 Republican co-sponsors as of now. Also, H.R. 1031, the Promoting U.S. Jobs Through Exports Act of 2015, which would also reauthorize the bank, has 189 Democratic co-sponsors. Taken together, these two bills make it clear that the Ex-Im Bank has the support of a majority of the House of Representatives, and that those who are raising their voices against it in this committee here today are a very, very small but very vocal minority. Chairman Hochberg, I'd like to turn now to the specific bank mandates under discussion today and their support by both Democratic and Republican leaders. First, the devoting a portion to small businesses. The Ex-Im Bank Act amendments of 1983, the bill that first directed the Ex-Im Bank to devote a portion of its financing to small businesses, was signed into law by President Reagan, correct?
That's correct.
And the Ex-Im Bank Reauthorization Act of 2002, which increased the small business lending target to 20% of the bank's authority, was signed into law by President George W. Bush. Am I correct in that?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And the same 2002 act signed by President Bush also established the bank's renewable energy mandate. Am I correct in that?
Exactly, sir.
The same mandate that has been objected to by my colleagues across the aisle today. I'd also like to discuss the history of the Ex-Im Bank's sub-Saharan African mandate, which requires the bank to expand its commitments in that region. Chairman Hochberg, this mandate was established in an amendment adopted under Republican Financial Services Committee Chairman Jim Leach. Am I correct in that?
That's correct, sir.
And this amendment received bipartisan support before being incorporated into the Ex-Im Bank Reauthorization Act of 1997, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Is it fair to say, then, that members of both parties, including Republican and Democratic presidents, have supported this bank and its specific commitments to small businesses, renewable energy, and also sub-Saharan Africa?
That is absolutely correct, sir.
Well, thank you, Chairman Hochberg. I find it hard to say, speaking for myself, that I understand why, after this long-standing bipartisan support for something that is a win-win for American taxpayers and American jobs, why this bank is suddenly the focus of political controversy at all. So I thank you for appearing here today and putting up with this committee, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back, and with that, we recognize Chairman Jordan from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hochberg, how much financial assistance did the Export-Import Bank provide to Solyndra, or actually not Solyndra, but to the gentlelady from Wisconsin? You said it was a Belgian company that you provided assistance to who bought panels from Solyndra. How much was that package, that authorization?
The loan was $10 million.
$10 million. And do you recall when the bank approved this financing that benefited the Belgian company, which then benefited Solyndra?
It was a loan to the Belgian company. It was approved by the board in February of 2011.
And at that same time, our records show that Solyndra was in serious trouble, and it was renegotiating a loan guarantee it already had with the Department of Energy. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of that, sir.
You are aware of it now, but I'm asking, were you aware of it then?
I can't recall. That's over 4 years ago. What I
No, but this is kind of important. This is the company went bankrupt. This was the poster child for those of us who thought this 1705 program at the Department of Energy was goofy, where they had 23 companies get $15 billion, and they all had junk bond credit ratings, BB minus ratings. So Solyndra's in trouble. They're refinancing, redoing their loan with the Department of Energy, and at the same time that happens, you're saying it's just coincidence that the EXIM Bank is doing a $10 million financing deal with the Belgian company who's going to buy solar panels from Solyndra?
Without question, sir. That Belgian company I tried to mention was looking at Chinese, German, and American panels.
When you
chose American panels.
When you approved the $10 million in financing that helped the Belgian company buy panels from Solyndra, did you know that Solyndra was in the process of refinancing with the Department of Energy?
I can't answer that question, sir, because I don't know the answer.
So, well, further question, did anyone at the EXIM Bank, to your knowledge, get on the phone and call people at the Department of Energy and ask what may be happening with this Solyndra loan at the Department of Energy at the same time you were getting ready to approve a deal that was going to benefit Solyndra?
Well, the loan was made to the Belgian company. The panels were put in place, ensured that they were actually operating as planned before any disbursement was made. That loan is on the books, is being paid back on time. So that loan is a good loan. It's being paid back on time.
My question's not about the loan. My question is, here was Solyndra benefiting from what you were doing. I want to know if you also knew they were getting other taxpayer assistance from the Department of Energy. And did that factor into your decision?
That normally would not factor into our decision.
I'm not saying if it normally would. I'm saying did it?
Sir, that's over 4 years ago.
No,
in
but
my
this
tenure
is,
at the
but
bank,
Mr. Hochberg, this is
done-
kind of, you knew in February 2011 when you did this, you knew it was $10 million.
Actually,
It's kind of a high-profile issue.
I stand
at the
corrected.
time.
It
It was
was-
the company that went, it was sort of the poster child for this program at the Department of Energy, and it went bankrupt, costing the taxpayers millions of dollars. And at the same time that's going on, you're financing a company that's going to buy Solyndra panels.
And that loan is being paid back, and the jobs were created, and we're getting paid back in full.
I didn't dispute that. I'm just saying, did you know and did you coordinate with the Department of Energy when this was all happening?
No, we don't coordinate with the Department of Energy.
Did you talk to anyone at the White House, anyone at the Department of Energy when you were doing this Belgium deal that benefited Solyndra?
Oh, absolutely not.
All right. Let's go back to this.
And the loan
How
was
many
made in June or
projects-
July of that year. I want to just make sure.
How
I
many
understand.
projects, authorizations does the EXIM Bank do in a typical year? How many did you do last year?
In the range of 3,500.
3,500. How many of those 3,500 did the recipient pay for some travel for EXIM employees while those EXIM employees were in that time frame of deciding whether this entity was going to get financing?
Sir, as I mentioned, we have travel that is paid for by a sponsor for large projects so that.
Well, I'm asking,
look,
3,500, how many of them did the recipients pay for travel?
I'd be happy to get back to that. I don't have the precise
Take a
number.
guess.
I'm not going to take it. I don't want to mislead you.
Half of them?
No, I don't want to mislead you.
20%?
I'm not going to speculate.
Well, I mean, what we do know is the one I referenced in my opening questions. $97,000 for employees, and those 4 employees got to travel to those places like Tokyo, London, and the South Pacific,
Sir,
paid for by Exxon, and Exxon gets a $3 billion deal.
Sir, those travel is just like a Codell. This is about going to investigate. Negotiations happened in London, they happened in Japan, and then there was visits to Papua New Guinea. This was a large project with a large
Mr. Hochberg, I'd
consortium.
like for you to provide to the committee, how many of the 3,500 deals you did last year, how many of those involved travel paid for by the people, the entity getting the loan, getting the guarantee, getting the financing? I want to know how many of those 3,500 had that practice in place.
I will be happy to provide that, and that practice is consistent with law, and that I should also add that board members who vote on these transactions never take part in those trips.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Washington, Mr. Heck, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I seek unanimous consent to insert in the record letters from the Export-Import Bank dated April 16th and April 24th to this combined subcommittees to remove any mystery about receipt of these. The committee has received them with your permission, sir.
Without objection, so moved.
Secondly, my friend Mr. Mulvaney made reference to a dated comment by the Boeing Company about the impact of the elimination of XM. I don't know what the date was on that, but let me give you one from the last several days from Reuters. Boeing Company may have to relocate U.S.-based engineering and manufacturing jobs overseas if Congress eliminates funding for the U.S. Export-Import Bank, Chief Executive Jim McNerney said on Thursday. Quote, most of my engineering and manufacturing jobs are in the United States, and I'd like to keep it that way. But without XM, you'd have to start asking the question about where they should be, end quote. I've said before, and I say in the most serious and somber of possible terms and tones, we're playing with fire. We're playing with fire with the heart of the manufacturing base in America if we continue down this path. My friend from South Carolina, whom I'm very sorry left, asked a pretty spectacular question earlier, namely, in the 3 years since the XM was reauthorized, what happened to cause it to go on life support? What happened to cause it to go from 330 votes in favor of to life support? The problem with that, of course, as the chair of the Export-Import Bank began to outline, is that it's not on life support. It does, in fact, have 250 co-sponsors of 2 bills. And my friend, I think Ms. Moore, referred to 189. That's wrong. It's 190. And there are 60 from the other side of the aisle for Mr. Fincher's version. The problem here isn't that it's on life support. The problem is that it hasn't been subjected to a vote. There is not a person sitting in this room who would dispute the fact that the votes are there to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank if it will but come to a vote. But it's a fair question. What happened since that reauthorization? That chair hasn't changed. That chair has. Mr. Backus, who chaired this committee when it was reauthorized, led it through regular order. Last year, when it was reauthorized for a short period of time, it was outside of regular order. Earlier in this term, this winter, we had an amendment to the committee oversight bill, very innocuous, very neutrally worded, suggesting that consideration of reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank ought to be subjected to regular order. And the new chair, the factor that has changed, opposed it, and it was defeated. Now, if I were a cynic, I'd say that's because he's afraid. He knows the votes are here. He darn well knows the votes are here. That's why he won't bring it to regular order. Mr. Gowdy asked another interesting question of Mr. Hochberg, not a terribly fair one, but an interesting one. Did he think that facts would persuade the chair of the committee? Well, the truth is they don't. And the truth is equally, I don't even blame the chair for that. This is a matter of philosophy and values. And the chair of the committee, who is opposed to regular order, who has publicly announced he's opposed to reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank, will not have his mind changed by facts because it is a matter of philosophy. And he is 100% entitled to that philosophy. But it does not represent the majority point of view of the United States House of Representatives by any stretch of the imagination. Any stretch of the imagination. If that were true, then he would bring Mr. Fincher's bill to markup. But he hasn't, and he hasn't scheduled it. And I think it's highly unlikely he won't schedule it Because again, he knows the votes are there. 190 Democrats on Ms. Waters' version of the bill, Ms. Moore's and mine, 60 on Mr. Fincher's. The votes are there to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank. He has his foot on the air hose as a matter of philosophy. He doesn't believe in the EX-Im. He's entitled to that point of view. I don't believe he's entitled to keep the will of this body from manifesting in consideration of this institution, this 80-year-old institution that creates jobs for Americans. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired, and with me being the last one, I appreciate your time. One area I do quickly want to do, and I recognize myself here for 5 minutes, but I do want to quickly explore something that was maybe touched on. But you said you talk to Secretary Lew about twice a year about particular projects.
3 times a year. I don't keep a journal on how many times I speak with him.
Undersecretary Sheets, many times?
Many times.
How about the State Department interaction? Who and how often do you speak with at State Department?
Currently, I work with Undersecretary Novelli, who is in the economics. Obviously, interaction. I just saw Secretary Kerry when I was in.
So you do speak with the secretary level, right? So Secretary, okay.
If I'm on a trip, sometime we have traveled together. I was with him coming back from Panama, in fact.
Yeah, I had seen in the paper that. I assumed you had talked to him then. So did you do any of those types of trips with Secretary Clinton as well?
I traveled with Secretary Clinton once to China and once to Africa.
And how often would you talk to her beyond that?
Oh, I speak to Secretary Kerry more frequently.
Okay. Well, she very publicly talked about the Russian airline deal and had said in 2009 that Export-Import Bank would be looking for their application. So is there interaction directly? Did she have interaction on that particular deal with you?
No, not to my knowledge.
But she threw it out there rhetorically then, I guess, maybe?
Well, we're a part of, our State Department is also part of economic statecraft and commercial diplomacy. So when we're overseas, we're trying to sell products, we're trying to advance American interests. So it's not unusual for other members of the administration to invoke our name.
Sure. So invoke your name and presumably follow up on that.
There's sometime there is.
I would hope so.
Sometime there is, sometime
Okay.
there isn't.
All right. Well, how about Cuba? Have you granted any deals into Cuba?
No, we've been closed in Cuba, and it's in our charter, a prohibition on Cuba, and it's also this Congress has sanctions on Cuba.
No,
so we do no business in Cuba.
Okay, but obviously, administration is changing that. Do you plan to approve any deals into Cuba?
Our charter prohibits it.
Okay. All right. Curious also just a little bit, this was, the hearing was supposed to be a little more on the mandates, the elements that you're required to do, both renewable energy portfolio, sub-Saharan lending. Do you acknowledge that there are not enough deals to hit your 10% mandate?
In
the renewable, yes.
Yes, there's not enough exports to hit that number.
Okay. So do you believe that that should be in there?
I think the mandates have been good. I think what we have done.
But they're not achievable.
Well, that's a target that's in there. But
you could argue that you're mandated to do that, just as you're mandated to not do deals into Cuba. What if there's a renewable energy deal in Cuba? I mean,
we would not.
You've got conflicting.
No, we would not. There are a number of countries we do not do business. We don't do business in Cuba. We don't do business in Venezuela. North Korea, there are a large number. There are a number of countries. I'm not going to quantify.
So you are not open to removing the renewable energy mandate?
Mr. Chairman, that's in the hands of Congress. These 3 mandates were put in place by Congress, and we will execute them. Congress, it's their decision, your decision to make whether you want to continue them or not.
In general, what are the parameters of the sub-Saharan lending, and are you able to achieve those?
Well, the sub-Saharan lending does not have a particular target in mind, so that we simply make extra effort. I travel there once a year, our vice chair. That's part of her portfolio. We have 2 people who do business development there to make sure that companies understand if they're afraid of exporting there because of the financing, we can let them know what tools we have.
and I'm being requested for 5 seconds, so I will recognize my friend from Wisconsin.
Thank you
for
so
5
much,
seconds.
Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out, there are 1 billion people in Africa. We really do need that business.
All right, and with that, I'd like to recognize my friends from South Carolina for my remaining time.
Mr. Cartwright asked why this wasn't an easy thing to do, why it was a big deal. I want to read something. Quote, "The purpose of the Export-Import Bank is to create American jobs for American workers. Unfortunately, the bank has a history of providing assistance to companies that have been exporting American jobs and hiring cheap foreign labor. For example, the Export-Import Bank insured a $3 million loan to help General Electric build a factory where Mexican workers will make parts for appliances that will be exported back to the United States. As a result, 1,500 American workers will lose their jobs to Mexican workers who will be paid only $2 an hour. I urge my colleagues to oppose S. 1372, the Export-Import Bank Reauthorization Act." The gentlewoman from California, Maxine Waters, in June of 2002.
So, of interest, no doubt, and at this time, I'd like to thank Chairman Hochberg for being here, taking time today to be with us. There is no further business. Without objection, the subcommittees stand in adjournment.